In the last episode, we left off with the passing of Sin-Muballit and the dangerous neighborhood that the relatively young kingdom of Babylon was now a part of. It was surrounded by enemies, or at least potential enemies, on all sides. Rim-Sin of Larsa had gobbled up Babylon's two main allies, Uruk and Isin, and no doubt now had eyes on Babylonian territory. To its north, the kingdoms of Upper Mesopotamia and Eshnunna were looking to expand. It was into this dangerous world that Hammurabi became king in 1792 BCE. With so many rivals, the question was not whether Babylon under Hammurabi would thrive, but would it even survive? Let's find out. Hammurabi is a name that most of us have likely heard of. He's most well known as a lawgiver and for the code of laws that have been attributed to him. However, this was written towards the end of his 42-year reign. More than just a lawgiver, he was a shrewd king, administrator, diplomat, tactician, and builder. Ruling between the years 1792 to 1750 BCE, the contributions that Hammurabi made in reshaping the ancient Near East cannot be overstated. I really believe that he's one of the most fascinating people in the history of the world. In this program, I want to expose you a bit to the political life of Hammurabi and how he became the most powerful man of his day. Let's start at the very beginning of his life. Already, we're at a bit of a loss because we don't know exactly when Hammurabi was born. His mother's name is unknown, but his father was Sin-Muballit, the king of the moderately sized kingdom of Babylon. We call the dynasty that he was part of the First Dynasty of Babylon, which was founded by an Amorite chieftain named Sumuabum. Though we don't know his birth date, we do know through the painstaking work of archaeologists and historians who have translated and cross-referenced thousands of ancient cuneiform documents that he became king of Babylon in the year 1792 BCE. Because his reign was so long, he must have been relatively young at the time of his ascension to the throne, but whether he was in his teens, 20s, or even his early 30s is unknown. Regardless, Hammurabi's first year as king was an interesting, if not dangerous, time for Babylon. As mentioned earlier, it was surrounded by several kingdoms, three of whom posed the greatest threat. In the south was Babylon's oldest rival, the kingdom of Larsa, who Hammurabi's father, Sin-Muballit, had fought on at least 2 occasions. While Larsa was definitely the older and you could say more seasoned enemy, at the time, Eshnunna actually posed the greater threat. Located in the Diyala River Valley, Eshnunna was expanding rapidly to the west and the south. This was most apparent during the reigns of 2 of its more ambitious kings, Epik-Adad II and Naram-Sin. The Naram-Sin we're talking about here was a king of Eshnunna and a different person than the famous Akkadian king of the same name. The other great king of the north was Shamshi-Adad. In the years prior to Hammurabi's coronation, his kingdom had grown leaps and bounds to include not just the cities of Ekalatum and Ashur, but the wealthy and strategically located city of Mari as well. Though his kingdom was much more powerful than Babylon, Shamshi-Adad had an intense hatred of Naram-Sin of Eshnunna. This is because shortly after he ascended the throne of his relatively small kingdom in 1833 BCE, he was forced to abandon it and flee as Naram-Sin's forces invaded. During this time, he sought refuge in Babylon for a few years, after which he left, gathered a sizable force of his own, and seized a city called Ekalatum, somewhere on the Tigris River. The precise location of Ekalatum has never been found, but we know that it was not far from another city, Ashur, which was the holy city of the people we later call the Assyrians. At the time though, Ashur was just a small kingdom, perhaps more like a city-state. After residing in Ekalatum for 3 years, Shamshi-Adad captured Ashur in 1808 BCE and temporarily made it the capital of his expanding kingdom. Though an Amorite, the Assyrians claimed him as one of their own, and he's often remembered as the first great king of Assyria. In the end, Shamshi-Adad left Ashur and went around conquering other parts of the region, including areas to the west, such as the great and wealthy city of Mari in 1792 BCE, which was actually the same year that Hammurabi became the king of Babylon. As mentioned earlier, Hammurabi ascended the throne of Babylon in 1792 BCE. The first 5 years of his reign were rather uneventful. From various archives that have been uncovered, it seems that much of his time was spent on financial matters and in rebuilding temples and canals. In 1787 BCE, he launched his first known military campaign against Larsa and captured Isin and Uruk, 2 cities that had at one time been his father's allies against Rim-Sin. However, archive documents discovered in both cities indicate that it was not a permanent victory, because just a few years later, Rim-Sin is cited again as being the ruler of both. The same was true for another city, Malgium, which was a small independent kingdom on Babylon's border with Larsa on the Tigris River. Hammurabi claimed victory in a battle here as well, but like Uruk and Isin, eventually the city reverted back to Rim-Sin. So, if Hammurabi had ambitions of holding a great empire, things were not going so well for him. In the summer of 1775 BCE, Shamshi-Adad passed away, and soon after this, so did his empire. Many of the kingdoms that he'd conquered declared their independence, including Mari. Its new king, Zimri-Lim, claimed to be one of the sons of Mari's last king, Yadun-Lim. Zimri-Lim had regained the throne of Mari with the help of the king of Yamhad, a man named Yarim-Lim. Now, of all of the kings from that time period, Yarim-Lim was undoubtedly the most powerful. One letter found in the archives of Mari and addressed to Zimri-Lim states, and I quote, "No king is really powerful on his own. 10 to 15 kings follow Hammurabi, the man of Babylon, Rim-Sin, the man of Larsa, Ibal-Piel, the man of Eshnuna, and Amut-Piel, the man of Katna. However, 20 kings follow Yarim-Lim, the man of Yamhad." The letter was written by a government official in Mari, perhaps warning Zimri-Lim to maintain his friendly relations with Yarim-Lim, who from other letters seems to have been his benefactor. Yarim-Lim also happened to be Zimri-Lim's father-in-law, since the latter was married to his daughter. Yarim-Lim would prove to be an invaluable ally for Zimri-Lim, especially against kingdoms to the east of Mari, such as Eshnuna. With Shamshi-Adad gone and his empire breaking up, Eshnuna's king, Ibal-Piel II, decided that now was the time to take whatever he could from his once great rival. He conquered many of the cities that were once held by Shamshi-Adad, including Ekalatum. Ibal-Piel ventured further south and in 1772 BCE captured the city of Rapikum. This no doubt must have frightened Hammurabi. Thus, Hammurabi made an alliance with Mari and its king, Zimri-Lim. To help bolster the defenses of his new ally, he sent troops to Mari during the winter of 1772 to 1771 BCE. Shortly afterward, Ibal-Piel attacked. Though the details are murky, Eshnuna ultimately seems to have been the victor. In exchange for peace, Zimri-Lim was forced to make some land concessions as well as to recognize Ibal-Piel as his overlord. However, Ibal-Piel and Hammurabi came to a separate agreement. In exchange for a cessation of hostilities and breaking his alliance with Zimri-Lim, Ibal-Piel withdrew his forces from Rapikum and gave it to Hammurabi. For now, there was a tense peace in the region, but it wouldn't last long. In fact, Ibal-Piel may have made peace with these two Amorite kingdoms due to another conflict that was brewing in the east with the traditionally much more powerful enemy, the Sukalma of Elam. To the east of Mesopotamia was the land of Elam. In Hammurabi's day, the name Elam, geographically speaking, was the name given to the wide expanse of territory stretching from the eastern marshes of the Tigris River to the southeastern highlands of what is today the Iranian plateau. The western part of this land was generally governed in ancient times from the city of Susa, while the eastern portion was administered by the city of Anshan. At the time, the country was ruled by what's become known as the Sukalma system, which essentially worked like this. There was one supreme ruler of the entire country of Elam, who held the title of Sukalma, a term meaning Grand Regent that was actually first used centuries before when large parts of Elam were ruled by the Neo-Sumerian kings of the 3rd dynasty of Ur. The Sukalma resided in the city of Anshan. Under the Sukalma was the Sukal, who was in charge of Susa and the western part of Elam. Though technically under the Sukalma in Anshan, the Sukal was given a great deal of autonomy, especially when it came to international relations with the cities of Mesopotamia. During Hammurabi's time, the Sukalma of Elam was a man named Siwe Palar Hupak, while the Sukal of Susa was a high-ranking Elamite official named Kudu Zulush. Though Elam didn't hold any territory in Mesopotamia, the kings of Babylonia seem to have acknowledged the Sukalma's position as a very important ruler whose power superseded their own. Quite often, the Sukalma would be called in to arbitrate disputes between kingdoms, much in the same way that a father might resolve disputes between his sons. Things though changed after Shamshi-Adad's death in 1776 BCE. His sons were unable to assert their authority over his now crumbling empire, and other rulers, such as Ibal-Piel of Eshnuna, took advantage of this. He rapidly absorbed many of Shamshi-Adad's former territories to make his kingdom of Eshnuna arguably the most powerful state in Mesopotamia. This, though, threatened Elam's access to the west, and so in 1767 BCE, the Sukalma sent a delegation to King Zimri-Lim of Mari. It just so happened that Eshnuna had recently seized territory belonging to Mari, and so Zimri-Lim was more than happy to form an alliance with the powerful Sukalma. The two also invited Hammurabi to join their alliance, which he accepted. Sometime either in 1766 or 1765 BCE, a coalition made up of Elam, Mari, and Babylon set out to destroy Eshnuna. While the details of the campaign are scarce, the conclusion of the war is not. Ibal-Piel was decisively defeated, with his capital of Eshnuna being captured and occupied by Elamite forces. However, instead of withdrawing, much like in the past, the Sukalma ordered the Sukal of Susa, Kudu Zulush, to administrate these newly acquired territories on his behalf. This made it clear to all that the Elamites were interested in maintaining a more permanent presence in Mesopotamia. It's also apparent from recently translated letters that the Sukalma didn't see Zimri-Lim or Hammurabi as equals, but more like his servants. For example, he commanded Zimri-Lim to break ties with Hammurabi. In a letter to the ambassador of Mari, the Sukalma wrote, and I quote, "Tell your master that his messengers should no longer go to Babylon, and that Babylonians should no longer go to your master." Around the same time, he wrote another letter to Hammurabi ordering him to withdraw Babylonian forces from any former territories of Eshnuna that they currently occupied. "The cities of Eshnuna that you hold, do they not belong to me? Release them and submit them to my yoke, otherwise I will pillage your country. My army would set out to the city Mankisum, and it would cross the river at that spot. At the head of my army, I myself would cross the river and invade your country." Later on in the same letter, the Sukalma demands that Hammurabi send him troops to aid him on a new campaign against Larsa. The Sukalma's letter states, "I have decided to start a campaign against Larsa. Mobilize your elite troops, your siege engineers, and the subjects that I saw in Eshnuna, so that they will be ready at my arrival. If one man whom I saw before is not ready, I will hold you responsible." Whether you call it arrogance or extreme confidence, one thing was clear: the ambition of the Sukalma had no boundaries. In response, Hammurabi wrote back, "As you have written to me, my army is ready and available for your attack. The moment you attack, my army will leave to assist you." Hammurabi probably had no intention of following up on the Sukalma's request. After all, the man did have at least some dignity. It could also have been due to inside information that Hammurabi surprisingly obtained from Larsa. Yes, Larsa, Babylon's traditional enemy. It turns out that the Sukalma may have been two-timing Hammurabi. He had sent similar messages to Rim-Sin of Larsa requesting his support against Babylon. In a letter that's been recovered from the Mari archives, Zimri-Lim's ambassador to Babylon, Yarim-Adu, wrote the following, and I quote, "The tablet that the Sukal of Elam had sent to Rim-Sin, Rim-Sin sent to Hammurabi, and Hammurabi likewise sent the tablet that the Sukal of Elam had sent to him to Rim-Sin. From that moment on, Hammurabi gave orders to his minister of foreign affairs, Sin Bel Apilim, and to one of his administrative secretaries, and he has sent them to the kingdom of Larsa. News from Rim-Sin regularly reaches Hammurabi, and news from Hammurabi regularly reaches Rim-Sin." Zimri-Lim was also worried about the Sukalma's intentions, since the latter was encroaching on his own kingdom. The Sukal, on behalf of the Sukalma, had dispatched several groups of troops made up of soldiers from Elam, Eshnuna, local northern kings who had switched over to his side, and mercenaries from the Zagros Mountains. Though Hammurabi and Zimri-Lim weren't enemies, they didn't trust each other either. However, the threat to both of them from Elam was just too great. Thus, they put aside their distrust of each other and declared a formal alliance against their mutual Elamite enemy. Along with troops from Mari, Zimri-Lim also called up tribesmen from the countryside to support his ranks. In addition, he contacted his wealthy father-in-law, Yarim-Lim, the powerful king of Yamhad, for additional support. Ishmi-Dagan, the son of the deceased Shamshi-Adad, was back in control of Ekalatam, and he also supplied additional troops for Hammurabi. It was an impressive coalition, and it needed to be. The Sukalma not only could amass the full might and resources of Elam, but also northern kings from Eshnuna. In addition, he seemed to have an endless supply of mercenaries from the Zagros Mountains. Other kingdoms, such as Larsa, stayed on the sidelines and took a more wait-and-see approach to the conflict. It was the Sukalma who made the first move. His forces laid siege to the city of Upi, located in Babylonian territory just across the border from Eshnuna. It was a bit of a surprise attack, and not having enough troops in and around Upi, Hammurabi called on all able-bodied men to fight, including freed slaves and traditional non-combatants such as farmers and merchants. Desperate for even more men, he requested help from Rim-Sin of Larsa, but got no answer. Eventually, the Babylonian garrison of the city was forced to flee. One of Zimri-Lim's generals, who was present at the siege, wrote the following: "The army of Hammurabi that held Upi boarded ships and fled. Enemy troops have entered Upi from the surrounding forts. The army of Elam returned to Eshnuna." It was a victory for the Sukalma. However, he restrained from launching another campaign until the following year in 1764 BCE, when he advanced on the city of Mankisim, an important crossing point of the Tigris River. The Elamites also laid siege to the town of Hirutum, near the city of Sippar. The Elamites clearly had the upper hand, but for reasons unknown, division broke out amongst the Sukalma's coalition. Many of the generals and their troops from Eshnuna that had allied with the Sukalma no longer wanted to fight for him. One Eshnunan general wrote the following to Hammurabi: "To our lord, the king of Babylon, say, thus speak your servants. The man of Elam took hold of us using massive force, and now he wants to devour your country. You have stood up to him, and there is nothing he can do." The Elamites, for their part, didn't help the situation. They didn't trust that the Eshnunans would remain loyal to them, and were probably getting weary of a war that seemed to have no end. Thus, many of them turned eastward, and along with their commanders, made their way back to Elamite territory. However, along the way, they plundered many cities, including Eshnuna. Thus, any allies that the Sukalma had left amongst the Eshnunans now also deserted him, with many of them banding together to expel any Elamites that still remained. And that's pretty much how the Elamite venture and attempt to create an empire in Mesopotamia came to an end. The defeat of Elam and his role in it must have inflated Hammurabi's ego. Though Mari and the troops that Zimri-Lim mustered together no doubt helped, Hammurabi nevertheless took sole credit for the Elamite defeat and expulsion from Mesopotamia, and claimed that he had, and I quote, secured the foundations of Sumer and Akkad. Now, the language of such a statement is curious, and if you're a king in southern Mesopotamia, quite troubling. Hammurabi mentioning Sumer and Akkad pretty much meant that he desired to absorb Sumer into his realm, which at the time was ruled by Larsa. During the war with Elam, Rim-Sin and Larsa had remained on the sidelines despite Hammurabi's call for help. There could have been several reasons for this, including Rim-Sin's old age. He was probably in his late 60s or 70s, which was extremely old in those days. It could also have been his dislike and distrust of Hammurabi. After all, Babylon and Larsa had had a pretty shaky history. Finally, there are some scholars who believe that Rim-Sin had some Elamite ancestry, and due to this, refused to fight alongside Hammurabi against the Sokolma. One has to also account for the fact that a war with Elam in Eshnuna was not in Larsa's immediate interest, let alone doing anything that would anger the Sokolma and the Elamites. Remember, Larsa had a relatively long border with Elam, and would have to defend that along with any Elamite attack from the north. All this of course didn't matter to Hammurabi. He just needed an excuse to attack and take Larsa, and Rim-Sin's apparent malfeasance gave him one. He began to smear Larsa and tell other kings that Rim-Sin had refused his gestures of goodwill and was even violating his territory. A document describing Hammurabi's declaration of war states the following, and I quote, "The man from Larsa has pillaged my country. After the great gods have removed the grasp of the Elamite, I did many good things for the man of Larsa, but he did not reciprocate. Now, I have complained to the gods Shamash and Marduk, and they have responded with a yes. I did not attack without the approval of the god." Then Hammurabi spoke to his troops. "Go, may the god march in front of you. If the city opens its gates when you arrive, accept its surrender. Even if the city disdains the oath of Shamash and Marduk, do not harm it." Sometime in 1763 BCE, Hammurabi attacked the kingdom of Larsa. He first went through the land of southern Yamutbal and its principal city, Mashkan-Shapir. There, Rim-Sin's brother, who like Hammurabi's father was also named Sin-Mubalit, was defending the city with part of Larsa's army. Hammurabi laid siege to Mashkan-Shapir, but shortly afterward, the city surrendered on Hammurabi's promise that he would treat the population with mercy. With such an important victory, as well as reports of leniency, other cities soon surrendered to Hammurabi and Zimri-Lim's forces. A report of the victory to Zimri-Lim from one of his generals stated the following: "My lord's army fares well. When my lord's troops reached Hammurabi, he was very happy. As he had just conquered Mashkan-Shapir, the entire country of Yamutbal cried out to Hammurabi, 'Long live our lord!' The army of Yamutbal has made peace with that of Hammurabi. Hammurabi took the head of his armies and laid siege to Larsa. In the last month of the year, he started the siege." The Babylonian coalition laid siege to Larsa for 6 months, after which, again according to documents from Mari, the city ran out of food. Facing starvation and imminent defeat, Larsa surrendered. Though they took down the walls, the Babylonian troops did not raze the city to the ground, and instead, Hammurabi simply declared himself to be the king of Larsa. Though he'd initially escaped, Rim-Sin eventually was captured along with an entourage of his followers and taken to Babylon. And so ended the reign of Rim-Sin of Larsa, who ruled his kingdom for 59 years, one of the longest in the history of the ancient Near East. They were no longer just words. Hammurabi had actually earned the title King of Sumer and Akkad. Though he now controlled these lands and more, he still wasn't satisfied. Hammurabi wanted Eshnuna. Thus, he declared his intention to campaign there as well. By now though, Zimri-Lim had had enough. He wanted his troops back and for them to serve him in his own wars. Not only this, but Hammurabi was growing just too powerful, and Zimri-Lim rightly feared that after Eshnuna, his kingdom of Mari would be next. Thus, not only did Zimri-Lim stop supporting Hammurabi with troops, but, as can be inferred by documents found in the Mari archives, he was cozying up to Eshnuna's new king, Sili-Sin. The two kings had exchanged presents, with Zimri-Lim tacitly acknowledging Eshnuna's superiority over Mari. It was a practical move. Zimri-Lim no longer trusted Hammurabi, and having Eshnuna as an ally, even if it resulted in a loss of some dignity, ultimately increased his kingdom's chances of survival. Hammurabi was furious when he found out about their arrangement, and swore that after he finished with Eshnuna, he would take out Mari as well. Both of these were not empty promises. In 1762 BCE, Hammurabi proclaimed that he, and I quote, overthrew in battle the army of Eshnuna, Subartu, and Gutium. What happened to Sili-Sin is unknown. He simply disappears from the record, with Eshnuna being annexed into Hammurabi's new empire. Eshnuna, though, had always been a threat and rival to the Babylonian kingdom. Sili-Sin, in Hammurabi's eyes, also wasn't a real king. He was actually a commoner, a general who'd taken control of Eshnuna after Babylonian forces had left the scene to fight against Larsa. Though initially after the war, he may have been of use to Hammurabi, he was still considered by many other kings to have been an illegitimate ruler. However, the king of Mari, Zimri-Lim, was different. He had been one of Hammurabi's most reliable allies. When Zimri-Lim signed a treaty with Eshnuna, Hammurabi probably took it personally. On the other hand, there's little doubt that Zimri-Lim feared Hammurabi's territorial ambitions in the north. These fears came to life in 1761 BCE when Hammurabi sent an army to conquer Mari. It's not known if Zimri-Lim was there at the time. It's possible that he may have been campaigning further west with one of his allies. What is known from Babylonian records is that Hammurabi's men entered Mari, took anything of value that they could find, tore down its defensive walls, and then set the city on fire. Hammurabi claims that he spared the people, but what this means exactly is unknown. Did he take everything of value from the citizens of Mari, allow them to leave with nothing, and then order the city to be torched? Did he forcibly relocate them to another part of his empire? Were they forced into slavery? We don't know the answers to any of these questions. We also don't know what finally became of Zimri-Lim. Hammurabi's final years were spent annexing more territory into his empire. He campaigned in northern Mesopotamia, especially in the region known as Subartu, around the year 1755 BCE. This is the area that was once part of Shamshi-Adad's kingdom and would later become one of the core territories of various Assyrian empires. In fact, we know from various letters to representatives that Hammurabi ruled over Ashur and Nineveh, two of Assyria's most historically important cities. When he was not out on military campaigns, he was devoted to running affairs of state, building temples, forts, maintaining canals, and really doing all that he could to make his empire as productive and profitable as possible. In the end, Hammurabi transformed Babylon from a relatively mid-sized kingdom into an empire that at its height covered pretty much all of modern Iraq and parts of Syria. He truly was a remarkable individual, and there's so much more about his life and legacy that we could talk about, but I'll save that for other programs. For now, I just hope that you got a good idea of how important and powerful Hammurabi was during his day. There's more to come, I promise, so if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe. Thanks so much for joining me, I really appreciate it. If you learned something, please hit that like button because it helps the video and the channel in general out a lot. Also, check out History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks again, and I'll catch you next time.